Hello everyone, it's been a while since my last 6-inch scale Star Wars action figure review, so today I thought I will correct that, and rather than looking at a typical Black Series release, I thought I'd look at Hasbro's more unusual Clone Wars animated series, Subline. Now, for most people, when you say Clone Wars, they will automatically think of the CGI animated series that debuted after Revenge of the Sith. However, this series is actually based on the animated or more illustrated style of animation that debuted between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And this series had a very different art style and definitely had its own personality and character. It's also where General Grievous made his debut, so it seems entirely appropriate that my first ever review from this series should be of the General himself. Now, it is worth noting that this isn't the first time that Hasbro have taken a stab at a General Grievous figure in the 6-inch scale, but it is the first time we've had him in the animated series style and colouring. So let's take a look at the packaging, and straight away you're going to see that this is worlds apart from their traditional Black Series line. This has a lot more characters, got a lot more colour, and of course it's also in that blister packaging as well, which is very different to the standard oblong case that we've been seeing with the window display in the Black Series. I'm a big fan of this approach. It actually has a slight nostalgic feel for me. This takes me back to the kind of packaging I used to see when I was growing up. So I really like this. I think it's really colourful and bright, and it's definitely very attractive if you put it on a peg on your wall or put it on display. There's something about it that's really colourful. I also really like that we have this animated image of General Grievous here. Again, just gives it a lot more character and personality, and I think it's really distinct and very nicely done. If we look at the back of the packaging, again we can see there's quite a lot of colour here, which is really nice and quite attractive. Again, very good for display purposes. The first third of the packaging is actually really very nice. We have a little bit of bio about the character and the series in general. There's some real nice artwork here as well, and I particularly like these animated sketches, their production stills, which are really fun. That gives it a little bit of extra insight into the animation process, and it just looks really cool. It's very different to what we normally get on the back of these packages, so I think this is very nice. Again, very nice to have this image of General Grievous here as well. And I also think it's worth noting that once we remove the figure from the packaging, we can see the interior card art behind that figure, and it looks really fantastic. This explosion that's going off the background, but a really vivid yellow and orange colour here, and it makes that image of Grievous at the front of the packaging really jump out. So this is really attractive with or without the figure. So, looking at the figure itself, the first thing you're going to notice is that this is very different to any other figure that's released in this or any other Star Wars line, because his body sculpt is entirely unique to this character. There's no one else quite like General Grievous in all of the Star Wars universe. Now, I've never owned a General Grievous figure before from this line, so it's difficult for me to be able to tell whether this is significantly different from the movie version of the character, but what I can tell you is that the sculpting here looks pretty good from my point of view. Clearly, there's going to be massive differences in the colour scheme here from the movie version, but all in all, this looks really good to me. I think this is a pretty authentic recreation of what we see in the Clone Wars animated series. I like how there's certain detailing, particularly in the eyes here as well. Some real nice paint apps here that really bring this character to life. Other than that, the colours of course are a lot more simplistic. There's really just 2 or 3 tones, but they are appropriate for what we see on screen, and it's still quite colourful. And there's actually some elements of shading going on here as well. If we look at the body, for example, we can see there's different colours. It may look like it's just blue and white, but there's actually a number of different shades and tones of these colours running through the entire sculpt, which is quite nice. As I mentioned, every part and every piece of this figure is pretty much unique to this character, and there's some really interesting decisions that have gone into making this figure come to life, especially when we look at the arms, which do separate, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Again, even if we look at the feet here, we can see this is a completely brand new sculpt, and you could be forgiven for wondering whether he would be able to stand freely with these rather unusual talons, but I can confirm that he has no issues balancing whatsoever, although occasionally he may wobble, so you do have to persevere a little bit, but generally speaking, I haven't had any issues posing this figure at all. I am pleased that Hasbro opted for a cloth cape. This is much more flexible than a rubber or plastic cape, which can be inflexible. However, because it is a flat white cotton cape with no other colourings or textures or any interior lining, anything like that, it does feel a little bit cheap and a little bit bland and a bit lackluster. It also is fairly shapeless and a little bit boring in terms of its overall shape and design. And it's not quite big enough to wrap all the way around him to create some interesting dynamic poses. It just feels ever so slightly short and like it's just hanging off the back of him. The articulation for this figure is pretty interesting. He does have a ball joint in the head, so he can move his head from side to side without issue, and If you persevere, you can wobble it and lean it left to right just about, but not a huge amount. Now there does seem to be some articulation at the base of the neck as well, so he can just about nod his head up and down, but as you can see, there's a fair amount of resistance here and there's not really a lot of give in it. Now he does have a ball joint in the shoulder, so he can lift his arms all the way up, but he can't really rotate them forwards, which is really disappointing. When his lower forearms are fused together, he can just about bend his elbow to about 90 degrees. But you'll notice when you get to this point, the lower arms do separate and become two distinctly different arms, which is really very cool. And they each have their own separate articulation, which is nice. You'll notice there is a separate hinge on each of these lower arms, which allow the arms to bend to about 90 degrees each. And then there is also a swivel at the top of what I suppose you would call the bicep to allow the arms to fold up and down as well, which is very cool. Less cool, however, is the torso articulation. There looks to be some kind of swivel in the waist area. As you can see, there's a little bit of give from side to side, but there's really nothing else. He can't lean left to right and he can't bend forwards or backwards. There is a weird ball joint in the hips that will allow the legs to kick out to the side a little bit. They'll also kick forwards and backwards a pretty healthy distance, which is really nice to see. And then there is a single joint at the knee that allows that leg to kick pretty much all the way back there, which is very good. Now, then finally, there is this hinge at the top of the hind leg, I guess, that allows that lower foot to kick forwards and backwards a pretty decent distance. And then finally there is a swivel, I suppose more of a ball joint, that will allow the foot to sort of hinge forwards and backwards and swivel from side to side. For accessories, he just comes with 4 lightsabers, 2 blue and 2 green. I have to say there's not much detailing or much in the way of paint taps of these lightsabers, but they do look pretty striking when he has all his arms extended like this, and you can create some really fun, really interesting poses with various combinations of these lightsabers. As a scale comparison, you can see that General Grievous, when he stood at full height, stands a good inch or so taller than the average 6-inch Black Series figure. And that's exactly the way it should be. This scales very nicely against the other figures in the collection, and it gives him a lot more presence than a lot of the other figures in the line. All in all, I have to say, I really like this figure. I'm only going to give him 3 stars though. Now, I think on the positive side, I think this is quite inventive. Now, if this is your first General Grievous figure, as it is with me, I'm quite impressed by the articulation. I think they've done a really good job incorporating his extra arms and giving him that extra functionality. I think he's very unique and very different. I really like the sculpting and, you know, what there is in terms of paint taps are nicely applied for the most part, although it is a little bit more bland, but that is to be expected. I think the lightsaber accessories are really fun as well. And overall, this is a quite pleasing figure. I like his height and I like what he adds in terms of just visual aesthetic to the toy collection. I think he's quite inventive and unique, which is definitely praiseworthy. Being more critical though, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed. Overall, there is a feeling this figure is quite lightweight. I mean that in the sense that it actually feels quite light in my hands. It feels very light plastic that we have, which is always a bit of a disconcerting feeling for any toy collector, because it feels like these joints might snap rather easily and he feels a little bit brittle. So you do have to be a little bit careful with him. And also, I am a little bit disappointed by the cape as well. It just feels a little bit formless and a little bit like it's lacking character. And it would have been nice if this had a wire in it, or maybe some kind of shading or something extra just to make it feel a little bit more interesting and dynamic. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.